6 years.
Despite what people might say.
Page 60, yeah. That's on page 60.
Wait. Yeah, it's about it, because it's a rating issue, it's not tuition.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back.
Versus how it's done.
John Gray is with us.
Okay, nice.
Let's council.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Feels like afternoon, but good morning. John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will screen share now that we've gotten to the ed funding sections. Nice. Okay, so similar to Beth, I would like to try to hit the highlighted sections as I can. But there is a slight difference in the way that we present here because her non-highlighted sections are from the Education Committee and the non-highlighted sections for you guys are things that are within your jurisdiction. And so I'll try to go a little bit slower through non-highlighted sections, but I'll try to hit the pieces that have changed here. And just to orient the group, I will be hopping out of the chair, switching places with Julia as we talk about particular topics. So what we're jumping into here is chapter 133 of title 16. This is your state funding of public education chapter. Much of this will be familiar to you, but what you're going to see updated here on page 4 is we've now plugged in the base amount figure. We didn't have that until yesterday. And so now that $15,033 has been plugged in. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to do this to you. Bottom of page 63.
That was very good too.
Yeah, it says categorical base, and I just, for the conversation earlier, Representatives Feltus and Holcomb know more about this than I do. I just don't know if that's a problem.
This is the section we were worried about, actually, that language right there.
Well, because it
19
did,
to 21, so look at lines 19 to 21.
right, I know, it does not refer to adult education,
Yeah.
whereas it did before.
But what is that 6,800, which is a vestigial number?
So just to call out, the sole change here is a technical change to ensure that folks don't confuse the existing term base education amount with base amount. That's the only reason that this is done here. The changes that are made elsewhere in the bill will be harmonized with any updates to that initial language when this becomes effective in July 1, 2027. So I don't know if that.
Does this have any material impact on the previous section we looked at? What's in the budget for adult education?
Does it do anything? Is
Right.
what I want to know, because none of those other programs actually are based on per pupil spending that way. So do we even need this language, or can we just strike it? Like, what would happen if we struck this language?
So the way that your adult education funding flows would be gone. That's.
So, but if we have it set for a specific amount, don't we have we decided how much we're gonna spend on it? Why don't we just put those dollars amount in for 1 year?
Who decided?
Well, I'm just saying, like, what, the 6,800, what does that have to do with the price of eggs?
That. I could repeat, yeah, I don't know where the 6,800 comes from. You're correct to identify that it's old. This is not taking a position on what's being done here, and other provisions are meant to ensure that folks look at adult education and come up with figures to use in the future. This is just a technical change for clarity as people read this chapter.
Not confuse the rest of when we're talking about base
Exactly.
with what's going into adult education.
Otherwise, you wouldn't even see this in here. Obviously, it would still exist, but the only reason you see it at the bottom of this page is for clarity.
So is the
And I-
term,
You go ahead.
is the term categorical base amount used anywhere?
It will be once this is made. Yes, any instance where base education amount is used, which is the piece that refers to generating funds for adult education and secondary, it would just now have this new term, categorical base amount.
And you'll define it somewhere.
That's what that is. This.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
And I have that, this actually makes me more confused because we are talking about categorical grants for K-12. And my hope was that categorical grants were for K-12 programs. But now we're saying we're gonna have a categorical base amount. But this base amount is vestigial and it doesn't actually have anything to do with how we currently fund adult ed. So I'm not even sure why we're talking about categorical base and adult ed.
If you guys want to call this a different thing, we can call it something else.
Representative Higley.
This is on a different subject, so let's finish this, I guess, first.
Yeah, unless I'm confused, which would be easy, this one.
Just
We are talking about something that is different from the regular case, so having a term that we agree to, I think might be useful, but I may be wrong.
John, if I could just ask you, section 401(1), the particular part of statute that is talking about, is that only specific to adult education?
I believe so. I believe so. I think this is used for adult and secondary. I think that's the call out in 4011.
So within that context, the categorical base amount that you're suggesting here is really only specific to that particular section of statute and that funding.
I think that's right. And like I said, if you want to switch the term to just something else, you can.
Yeah, I just think you're saying it's a technical change and we want to make sure it's not a material change.
It is entirely a technical change. It's just changing one word for another new defined term.
I have a problem with this because section 4011 is the education payment section for
Okay.
K-12 education.
Right.
This is not a technical change. Last year, we put adult education into the ed fund. This is vestigial from when this was the high school completion program and school districts were paying for their dropout prevention. Sometimes they contracted with adult ed providers. We killed that program. It doesn't exist anymore. So this is something that needs more attention, I'm just gonna say. And I don't know how you want to handle it in the current year, but I do not believe that a program that has nothing to do with K-12 should be listed as a categorical base amount under our education payment section, which is a payment for K-12 education.
So Representative Hope, I understand your concern about it. If there's a different term, but I think you're objecting to the actual structure.
I'm objecting to the structure because I think it needs to be addressed, particularly because we have now made sure that every adult in the state of Vermont who doesn't have a diploma can get 2 college courses out of our education fund for K-12. I have a problem with this in the education fund, a serious problem with that. And that's one thing. I can let that go if we're working on it for next year. But this language this is why we should not have been done in appropriations last year, but this language is from a construct that no longer exists. I don't know what you want to call it. Maybe we want to do a 1-year block grant to adult ed out of the education fund and just be transparent about what we're doing. Because we are using K-12 schools to underwrite Title II WEO activities. And maybe but when we're calling it a categorical base, we're implying it's part of the K-12 system. It's not.
But the study that we referenced on page 54 is to come back with recommendations for December 1st, 2025.
So what we're looking for right now is a way to fund out of school budgets a program that is not a school program. So I think in the education payment section, maybe, because that's what 4011 is, maybe we need to call it a block grant. Don't call it anything, but just a block grant to adult ed for 1 year.
This is the amount that's used to calculate grants. But
Except that's not what they're doing in rural. That's my problem. What there's such that sector is a mess right now, and they need work, which is why they're doing a study. But the way they're distributing rural is not based on. They don't collect. They're not doing equalized pupils. So I'm not sure for adult ed. The equalized pupil number referred to when they were funding, I believe, funding high school completion. This is not my specific area of expertise, but I'm believing that is from the high school completion program,
so the
which no longer exists.
yeah, I take your point to be a deeper substantive point about how to address funding, whether it should be from the ed fund for these particular pieces. And I will just say that the change here is if the committee wants to pursue that, that's something, but this change is just for clarity. Like this, if you don't like the word categorical base, we can change it to adult ed amount. We can come up with a term, but this is just a technical change to reduce confusion. And I see that it is not reducing confusion.
Let's put a pin in it for the moment and then continue on so we can focus on the other things. I mean, because that's probably a philosophical objection to it. And
It's philosophical this year. It becomes quite substantive when that line item grows, as everything we put in.
So we provided that in the study. This question of whether or not the study is sufficient to meet your concerns.
Did not mean to derail, just.
All good.
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Chair, just, you know, until yesterday, we were working with a $13,200 base amount. Now we're at 1533, and I don't remember any discussion around that as far as what we should choose. I mean, that's a 14% increase over what we were looking at for weeks. So, you know, the analysts from AOE had the other figures. That's why I was concerned with what Dr. Colby had said. Again, I think she had said that her figures were based on something above and beyond what we're currently spending based on standards and efficiency. And if that's the case, that's probably why there's that 14% increase. Again, I just don't, is there any discussion regarding going from the 13.2 to the 14% higher?
So why don't we can get to that, but we'll have John go through the language incorporating with Tammy, what Dr. Colby presented to us, and then Julie will show us the actual numbers, and then we can discuss the actual, yeah.
Thanks.
Representative Brannigan? You had your hand up.
I'm good. I was going to add to what Mark just said, but I'm good with waiting until we go through the whole thing and then go back and piece it apart.
Representative Odie?
Thank you.
I was going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about it later, so I'm not talking about it.
John?
Yeah, and just to orient here, when we're getting to the base amounts and the updated figures that you see here, up to this point, the education finance proposal draft that you've seen had placeholders. It didn't take a position on what the numbers would be. It did specify that it would be this cost factor figure, and so you're just seeing the Colby figures plugged in as the cost factor figure. So the base amount has been updated here for that $15,033 as discussed. The next section, section 35, this is your weighting. This is the weighting, and this now includes the updates from the presentation yesterday. So I'll walk through this. Hopefully this will be familiar from yesterday's presentation, and you're just seeing it now in legislative language. So on page 65, we've added some new definitions to the calculation of weighting section. Child with a disability to align with the special education chapter in Title 16 currently. This is picking up for, as you'll see later on, there are specific weights provided distinguished between costs of disabilities. And so this is just pulling in existing terms for special education. Disability, this uses the categories that you'll have heard described yesterday. So it calls out 3 distinct categories here. There are low cost, medium cost, and high cost disabilities identified. I can walk through the particular disabilities if that's helpful to get at this, but basically this is just giving you a set of categories and producing different weights based on the costs that are associated with those particular disabilities. English language proficiency level. This is each of the English language proficiency levels that are published in, and I may butcher this, is this WIDA? Is this WIDA? I don't know what WIDA stands for, but WIDA Access 2.0 and available to members of the consortium. So this is going to allow refined weights that get at the different proficiency levels English language learners have. Similarly, newcomer or SLIFE means a pupil identified as New American or with limited or interrupted formal education. And this will be part of that English language learner category. Basically, what you're getting is an economic disadvantage weight that's non-differentiated. It's just a straightforward economic disadvantage weight. And then you're going to end up, as we go through the draft, with more refined weights for your special education and for your English language learners. So you can think of those as just broken out versions of those pieces.
Representative Wazazak?
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
wow.
Yeah.
I don't even have to ask anymore. I'm thrilled. Just forgive my ignorance on the term, the legal definition of the term New American. Does that imply any type of citizenship? I'm thinking of like a refugee child who's here on temporary protected status, or
This I honestly don't know. I think it's part of the English language learner. Yeah, I don't know if others at the table may know.
A disproportionate part of our English language learners are refugee resettlement. So they're coming here many times. They've been in camps for years. They may have no formal education. And there are very intense costs associated with initial entry into school systems. And I think the purpose of the funding, the way it's structured, is you provide that funding up front because that early intervention reduces costs over the long run.
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning the
Yeah.
cost of a policy choice. I don't know if new American means an individual who is a new American in terms of citizenship.
It's
As opposed
referring
to-
generally, it's people who've been resettled.
Okay.
And many of them are not yet full citizens.
I don't want anyone to be excluded
They
from
have
this
new
funding
residents.
because they're, residents.
They're being resettled.
And I was gonna say, I can confirm too, I would just say I brought it in, it read to me as a technical term that is used in the English language space, which is why it's capitalized, but I can look at that.
Representative Odie.
I wonder if we have to be concerned about this language, considering what's happening at the federal level and whether we should use a different way to describe this that would not raise flags.
If you just said an English learner with limited or interrupted formal
Yeah,
education.
that's what I was thinking. That'd probably be
Just
enough.
take that out.
Anybody could have a limited or interrupted formal education.
So that's for the committee to discuss. I do think you probably lose something in doing that. I'm assuming that there are new Americans who don't fit into the S-Life category. And
Oh, yeah,
that
you
was
have to-
identified in Dr. Colby's presentation yesterday as warranting this particular way.
What if a new American is here legally? The new Americans who are in school under this, what's the definition of a new American?
So that's what Representative Wozniak was asking. I can look, this is just
That'd be
pulling
helpful.
in the measures
I think the
in the memo
problem,
from yesterday.
the Supreme Court has ruled, and it has not yet been overturned, that every child has access to a public education regardless of immigration status. And I think that's what they're trying to skirt around. I think if a pupil is learning, this is under the English learning
Yeah.
section. So this is targeting students who are learning English. So if you are a student who is learning English and you've had limited or interrupted formal education, I think the question is, would that capture all the students that we're concerned about?
So we need to figure that out.
So within the context, we might need to just put a couple of parameters around this as defined by
For sure.
X, X, Y, Z.
That's right.
I would be happy with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think without words, just
Okay.
specify.
Well, John's got to look into it.
Sure.
Maybe.
And I would also guess that Dr. Colby intentionally included both categories.
Representative Thomas.
Just the formatting then, so why is 7 different than 6? Why is not 7?
You'll see as we,
Part of English
you'll see
language.
as we come later on, because the English language proficiency level is trying to get at the refined weights that are about the level at which you're assessed.
Right.
And then there's a separate weight if you're a newcomer S-Life. So there's two potential weights there, so they have to be distinguished for those. purposes.
Representative Holcomb.
I think there are cost differences. If a child is literate in their first time, there are very significant cost differences.
Yeah, I
And
understand all that. I
everything.
just thought we could
Yeah.
have 4 categories. We've got the 3 proficiency levels and then this last one as well. So there's 4 categories. of English.
It'll make more sense once we come to the actual assigning of weights, because you'll see why they need to be differentiated. So existing provisions in subchapter B for the secretary determining ADM. But then we have the actual provisions for listing out what the weights are for particular categories, and we're on page 66. So what you see here in subdivision or old subdivision 1 is the removal of the grade level weights. Maintaining the same economic disadvantage category, but with an updated weight, which we'll come to later. So this is tasking the secretary with listing for each category the number of pupils within long-term membership that fit into this category. So this is spelling out all the differentiations, all the counts the secretary needs to make. So economic disadvantage. You're going to see EL pupils that have been most recently assessed at an English language proficiency level of, and then we have to differentiate between the specific levels. So level 1, level 2 or 3, level 4, level 5 or 6.
I'm just, sorry, this is like, I'm sorry, Chair Canfield, can I ask my one quick? It is a tiny little question. We go right back before 6, so that last be who are directly certified for free and reduced price meals, or should be or reduced price meals?
So I think free and reduced price meals may be the, like,
The term.
I don't think they're two separate things. I think it's a term.
Okay.
But that's the existing law. So this makes no modification to what the economic disadvantage category is.
Okay.
Unlike for EL, you're going to see these updates for the proficiency levels and for newcomer and the like. But this is the same economic disadvantage category as existing current law.
Okay.
So we walked through, there's going to be yep.
If I could, Mr. Chair, so, I mean, if we're including free and reduced lunches, why would there have to be a number who are certified for free and reduced lunch? I mean,
So the way to think about what this category is doing is identifying proxies that can tell you if someone is economically disadvantaged. So the fact that someone would receive free and reduced price lunches lets you know the category that they're in. Basically, it's a way of identifying if a student is economically disadvantaged. And so that's what puts it, you can think of sub A as providing another proxy, someone that meets the definition under the Universal Income Declaration form. It's just different ways of getting at who is economically disadvantaged.
but if we don't do that anymore, nobody's doing that, are they anymore? Determining who qualifies for free and reduced lunches?
They do.
So if we're
Can I
not
jump
doing
in
it,
here? I think I might have some clarifications from.
Do it.
All right, Emily.
That would be helpful. So when we passed Act 127, we spent a lot of time trying to get our heads around how we defined economic disadvantage in Vermont. And there were a lot of geographic discrepancies in economic disadvantage status, the way we were measuring it just through free and reduced lunch. That didn't match up to like the actual economic reality of families on the ground. And so we tried to use sort of use a number of different categories so that whether or not someone's sort of cultural propensity to sign up for food stamps or their ability to like drive to an office or their school's skill at getting forms collected, we wanted to make sure we were sort of giving every school every opportunity to count students as accurately as possible. And so we used these multiple different categories. Julia can probably share more about this, but the free and reduced price direct certification stuff is still does still happen in current law and does still happen in the field. And it's somewhat sort of separate from the actual provision of meals, strangely enough.
okay, thanks.
So that's your economic disadvantage weight. And we're still in the section where the secretary is assigning counts for these, not applying weights. So gathering information basically on the counts and long-term membership. We talked about sub 6. So this is EL pupils concerned with the English language proficiency level. And next, we're going to have another category of EL pupils. So on the top of page 67, those EL pupils that are identified as newcomer or SLIDE. After the EL pupils section, we have to identify where the special education weights, children with a disability that is identified as low cost, children with a disability identified as medium, and those identified as high cost, or children that have multiple disabilities, which would not be picked up in either of the low cost or medium cost counts. Because as you'll recall from yesterday's presentation, if it's a child with multiple disabilities, they're considered to fall into that high cost bucket as someone with multiple disabilities.
Just quick, added in, you've got an agreement issue in 7, 8, and 9. Children is identified, should be children are or child is.
It's the disability that's identified. but I-
Disability that is.
Yeah, but I totally, it looks funny.
That looks odd to me, but I get what you're
And
saying.
it's also something that I will think about this weekend because I did something here that's kind of like, I don't know, you could call it cute. The children with a disability is a technical term, right? It's referencing elsewhere in Title 16, but I'm kind of using this thing to say that the disability is identified as something else. So I can think more about it. I didn't want to
Say which.
children with with a disability that is identified as local, right? Like it
Or a
creates this
low-cost
weird
disability.
redundancy. So I'll think about it.
We're gonna let it go.
Excuse me, if you just put comma which instead of that, you might be able to.
Let John figure it
Instead
out.
of that, it's identified, which is identified.
Line.
Children with, oh, sorry.
I'm just gonna keep going. Yeah.
Time out, keep going.
It's, what you're seeing here, the struck language, this is removal of your sparse density school districts. And what you're gonna see later on is that a grant is provided for the school districts that have low population density.
68 now?
Yes.
I'm just trying to explain the struck language. So removal of the sparsity weight, or you don't need to identify the sparsity piece. And you don't need to identify small schools for the purposes of weighting, because those weights will be removed later in this section. You see at the bottom of page 68, reporting on weighting categories, that continues, so maintaining existing law. But we come to the actual assignment of weights on page 69, and this is subsection D. So for each weighting category, the secretary shall compute the weighting count by using long-term membership in that category, which is the totals that we just walked through all those categories. The secretary will have calculated, added up how many folks fall into a particular category. So what you see in sub 1 is the removal of the grade level weights. In subdivision 2, you see that you still have the same economic disadvantage category, but you're shifting from a weight of 1.03 to 1.02, which is what was presented in Dr. presentation yesterday. In subdivision 3, each EL pupil included in long-term membership shall receive an additional weighting amount based on the EL pupil's English language proficiency level of 2.11 if assessed as level 1, top of page 70, 1.41 if assessed as level 2 or 3, 1.20 if assessed as level 4, or 0.12 if assessed as level 5 or 6. So just to explain what you're seeing here is higher weights at the lower English language proficiency levels, decreasing weights as you progress up that proficiency level scale. Still on page 70, subdivision 4, we're continuing with EL pupils, but now we are including newcomer or S-Life, and they receive an additional weighting amount of 0.42. I recognize how hard it is to read this with all the struck-through language, so I know that that's frustrating, but maintaining what you'll see is, if I ever get to show you guys what the clean language looks at, it's so much simpler than existing law even. So it's, yes.
Future state.
Subdivision 5. I know, it'd be nice if I could just bring the clean language. Subdivision 5, each child with a disability included in long-term membership receives an additional weighting amount based on the cost level associated with that child's disability of 0.79 if the disability is identified as low cost, 1.35 if identified as medium cost, or 2.49 if the disability is identified as high cost. So that's all of the weights that were included, that I've been requested to add from Dr. Colby's presentation yesterday, and same provisions for adding up those figures. So school districts weighted long-term membership equals the long-term membership plus the accumulation of those weights that we just walked through. I've included subsection E here. There's no change made here. I just wanted to flag for folks that this is on the books, the hold harmless provision, which is a way of ensuring that there's not too much fluctuation in weighted long-term membership. That's not touched at all. And I could just have asterisks here that don't even show this. But because this hasn't been talked about, I wanted to.
Representative Holcomb.
I have just one question on this, because when Act 127 was put into law, we applied district weights to districts that do not operate schools. And as we heard from Tammy Colby, that is an inappropriate application of weight. But what we do see is in some towns that operate no schools at all, for example, that significantly increase their weighted pupils in ways that probably weren't warranted. And so we are transitioning, and this hold harmless by pushing out the change in weights, we're over subsidizing a lot of districts, but we're also going to slow the tail off. And I just want to point that out because when we make mistakes, it's very costly and there's a long tail to them. So that's something I'm really concerned about, because we're subsidizing people for costs they don't have. And Well, I mean, I think,
But
well, in that
what's the
case,
solution?
well, I don't think we should be weighting districts that for thin costing, period.
Yeah.
And that would be removing the weights for small schools if you don't operate a small school. If you operate a small school, then we have weights for small schools. But we are subsidizing people who have no cost and sending kids out of the country, out of the state, into very large schools as if they're struggling to operate small schools. It makes no sense.
This is to move away from that.
There's no small school weight proposed here.
It's the transition.
Sure.
This whole harmless will affect us in the transition, because if they received 40% more students because of an inappropriately applied weight, then as we transition, that will slow the loss of those weights. The whole,
So
that's how it works.
can we put a solution in here? Can we
I'm,
propose a
I'm
solution?
just making sure we know. I don't know at this point. It's too late, so I think we're just gonna.
Representative Kornheiser.
It's too late. It's too late.
I'm curious how this language would change if a district, say, doesn't exist anymore and a new district is formed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, there
I
would
don't
be
know
nothing
how
to
to-
maintain, right?
Sorry, what was that?
And as soon as we'll have new districts by 27, the 27 school year.
Can
Yes, and
John
just-
answer
just-
my question?
Sorry?
John, can you
Sure.
answer my question?
Oh, yes, yeah, I thought you were asking it rhetorically, not as a.
I really wasn't.
Okay. I took you to be saying, and I went along with the line to say, if a district doesn't exist, there's nothing to maintain in terms of weighted long-term membership, right? You have a new district. So there's nothing that you have to maintain at a particular level, like,
There's no hold harmless to that plan.
exactly, there's nothing to hold.
Nothing to
harmless.
compare.
Representative Odie.
That doesn't solve the problem that has just been identified by Representative Holcomb. So I wonder if that can be addressed now. Can we talk about whether we can address that now?
So if the problem that is identified is that the weights that are being stripped would contribute to a weighted long-term membership that would still apply once you've transitioned to this new foundation formula, that will not be a problem because they wouldn't be maintained at that level.
But in the meantime, and until and if it happens, can we address that now or not? I'm asking.
It is not currently contemplated in this bill. I think to Representative Holcomb's point, it's not contemplated. We don't have words around it to put in here in terms of eliminating that particular weight for somebody that's coming from the sparse area that's not attending
Yeah.
a school that doesn't need that weight, for instance. So that's not contemplated in that in terms of eliminating that in the people's education payment now.
And so maybe it will be, I think the committee knows, but maybe it will be helpful for orienting the way that I'm approaching questioning at this point. These provisions are part of sections of the bill addressing particular problems. So this is transitioning to the foundation formula. If folks have an appetite to do things in the intervening years, that's something that can be talked about. But when I'm walking through these sections, I'm always thinking this is July 1, 2027. We're speaking to the problem of solving what the foundation formula is. But that is hopefully helpful context. Yeah.
Thank you, John. I think that's where we need to keep our energies right now.
Subsection F, this is not new language. I just have this highlighted because this whole section is being reviewed for editing. But this is your determination of EOP. And just to remind the group, that's your weighted long-term membership for a school district multiplied by the base. There are some updates to this subsection H, and we are on page 72. So much of the provisions here are the same as you'll have seen in previous drafts, but the timeline is accelerated here. So you'll see on or before January 1, 2026, so coming up shortly, to calculate based on consensus view updates to the weights and the base amount, including any inflationary measure. This is a way of ensuring the cost factor numbers that are being included today or that are proposed to be included today would be addressed next year. So you could immediately revisit these numbers and see if they're working. And I would note that this other provision, including any inflationary measure on line 13, that's new as well. It's just to call out that there's going to be an assessment as to whether or not that type of inflationary measure is the appropriate one to include here. And you're going to see later in the draft reporting provisions related to inflationary measures as well.
Before we go much further, jumping back to the top of 72, the EOP is based on long-term
Weighted long-term membership. Yep. So all the weights that we just walked through, those are picked up when you, yep.
Was that,
Was you picked up when what?
Those are picked up through the multiplication of the base by that weighted long-term membership. So the EOP that you receive is reflective of the needs that students have, the differing educational needs.
Thank you.
is that different than determining what we're using for enrollment numbers? Like we talked about whether using a 2-year average membership, et cetera. This is sticking with long-term weighted average daily membership? Okay, did Professor Colby recommend that?
I believe so. I'm gonna phone a friend.
I'm confused too.
Long-term weighted average daily membership is a 2-year. Yes.
Yeah, the 2 years is more important when it's small, but as you get bigger, it's less important. You need 2 years to come.
And this is still future state. Okay.
This is future state.
Yep. Okay.
And weighted long-term membership is a 2-year.
Yep. Okay, great, thank you.
Vaguely.
Transportation reimbursement is currently through grants now, is that correct?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Jumping to section 36, I'm going to put aside the less any offsetting funds language. That's going to make sense when we come to the vision of the bill later on. But what I'll call out here is just the addition of an appropriation for small schools and sparsity support grants. So as you'll recall, we're proposing to remove those weights. And so now grants are being included for these. We can jump again. Yep.
You see, and B, again, we've got the 6,000 again. This is.
Yes, exactly.
Again, it's still linked.
Yes, this is just the update of the definition that is inaccessible. And you'll see that we have the updated inflator there to remove the no longer published eight. I'm going to ignore the less any offsetting funds language for now. That's going to make more sense later. And I will jump down to the actual grants. We're on page 75. So section 37, small schools, sparse school district support grants. What you're going to see here is modeled on the language that existed for the small school supports grants, which had to use particular provisions to get at enrollment. We can't reference, for instance, long-term membership for a school because long-term membership is at the district level. So you need provisions to call out how you would identify students at a school. So that's why you're seeing a definition for enrollment here. And this matches the definition of enrollment that was used in previous section 4015, which was the small school support grant. So that's the number of students who are enrolled in a school operated by a school district on October 1, a student to be counted as one, whether the student is enrolled as full-time or part-time. A small school is identified here as a school that has fewer than 100 pupils in 2-year average enrollment and has been determined by the State Board of Education on an annual basis to be small by necessity under standards consistent with those submitted to the General Assembly pursuant to section 6. You'll recall that earlier in the education provisions, there's assignment of a task to the State Board to develop guidelines. Sparse school district, we're at the top of page 76. This is a school district where the number of persons per square mile residing within the land area of the geographic boundaries of the district as of July 1 of the year of determination is fewer than 55 persons. This is using the same language that's used for the sparse school district weight in existing law, but it's tied to just that 55 persons figure. You'll recall from Dr. Colby's presentation yesterday that that was the sole threshold that she felt appropriate to get at. 2-year average enrollment, the average enrollment of the 2 most recently completed school years, and then the actual grants themselves. So subsection B, small school support grant. Annually, the secretary shall pay a small school support grant to each school district for each small school within that district in an amount determined by multiplying the two-year average enrollment by 3,157. And your sparsity support grant, secretary to pay annually a sparsity support grant to each sparse school district in an amount determined by multiplying the long-term membership by 1,906. And just to note here, the reason you can call out long-term membership is that we're talking about districts, so we don't have to use the same enrollment provisions. Those are consistent with the one of the approaches that was suggested yesterday in Dr. Colby's presentation for how you could transition away from sparsity and small school weights to a grant approach.
Sorry.
I have a question. Maybe we should discuss it later. My concern about the small school is that I presume the original intent of wanting to give a extra to small schools is because perhaps it was K through 8 in one small building. What if within a district you end up consolidating things and you have K through 3 in this particular building and you have 4 through 6 in this particular building? So it's not small in the sense that you've got, you have to have more staff in order to cover the K through 8 in this particular building. Now you've got K through 3 and it's more concentrated, and we have maybe gained the class size limits and all that kind of stuff at that point. So why is there an extra burden to operate that school when it's K through 3 and it's concentrated, where there might be a bigger burden if it's a K through 8, just because the building is a particular size. And the same thing with sparsity. Well, yeah, right. So that's, if we actually get to some consolidation and the building is small, well, that's one thing. But if you have, if you've concentrated your teaching staff and your resources to be more efficient for K through 3 than you were with K through 8, why is there an additional subsidy available or warranted? I mean, are there needs there that make a difference?
It's a good question, Mark.
Can I jump in on that? I think that's exactly that. Representative Feltus is the reason to make this a grant and not a weight, that then it becomes eligibility provisions that are connected to the Agency of Education's process and the State Board of Education's process. And so as we move through what will likely be a even once we have new districts, it'll likely be a multi-year process of transformation, that we can continue to narrow when those grants are necessary or not necessary based on exactly what you described. And then we would, of course, also continue to have regular recalibrations of all these numbers to make sure that it does cost more in those cases, right? And the hope is that it won't. That's what we're aiming towards. But we don't want to starve schools before it's possible for them to make the changes that we're asking of them. So by moving to this grant, we're able to have the money be much more driven by policy and to make exactly the decisions you described. Because I agree, I think those are all really good points. And I'm hoping that by having this be a grant, it can be sensitive to that exactly.
I may just to add, in the previous page, on page 75, where the small school means it has been determined by the State Board of Education on an annual basis to be small by necessity. So that gives a lot of leeway as to how the state board is going to define small by necessity.
But I think Marty's point was that it could still be small by necessity physically.
Right.
But it could be operating at scale if you're just looking at K through 3 or 3 through 5. So it might be a small school, it might be less than 100 kids, but if it only has 2 or 3 grade levels in it and it's staffed appropriately and the ratios aren't completely out of whack, why are you then subsidizing them as if it's costing $30,000 a child to attend that school?
But then it might be small by choice, not small by necessity.
But I don't.
But you don't want to.
What difference does it make?
It's not, I think it's more like what Emily said, but the Chair Kornheiser on the screen said before, just as you're allowing extra resources maybe to evolve to that state, and as we revisit what the weights should be, because we're going to be making sure they're accurate, the weights could evolve over time to be something less in those cases.
Representative Kornheiser, did you want to respond?
No, that's what I'm saying. And this is something that might be deeper in the memo and Julia might have some insight into. But my memory of talking to Professor Colby about this is that's not just class sizes that cause small schools to be more expensive to deliver services.
Every school has to have a janitor, every school has to have a nurse, it's too expensive.
But by using a grant, it'll be much easier to be sensitive to exactly all those changes that we're hoping for is, I think, sort of the baseline of that. And if it does turn out that it's not, that it doesn't cost more, we'll be able to adjust those grant amounts when we do the recalibrations that's somewhere else in the bill.
To redefine what might be the eligible requirements.
This is where Julia was gonna swap with John and show us the actual figures.
Yeah. Well, let's take 5, and I mean 5.